got Kaspa here tonight, who's ordained in the Pure Land tradition and lives in the Malvern Hills. He is also a therapist and an activist. So I know him from Buddhafield and from Extinction Rebellion Buddhists. And I know him as a very thoughtful man, and I'm looking very much forward to hearing what he has to say tonight in his talk that is titled Sitting with the Ashes. So I'm going to hand over to you, Kaspa. Please tell us.
Thank you, Katja. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. Hello. Yeah, nice to see some people that I know and some people that I don't know. Just going to invite you to start with a brief check-in with yourself. How are you doing right now? So close your eyes if that feels comfortable. Noticing how you're supported by the ground, the chair. Noticing your body. Places that are relaxed and at ease. Places that are holding strength. Notice how the body changes with the breath. Noticing thoughts, feelings, emotions. In your own time, opening your eyes, bringing your attention to the computer screen. Normally at this point, I'd ask people to notice each other. I guess you can do that if you're on gallery view. Maybe I'm just going to invite you all to switch to gallery view if you want to for a moment, so that you can see the other people who are in the room with us and just kind of have a sense of a community. And then I'm going to ask Katja to unmute us all. And then I'm just going to count down from 3, and then we can all say hello at the same time. 3, 2, 1. Hello.
Hello.
There we are. Yeah, there's some real people out there. That's nice. Okay, that's good. I feel like I'm talking to some people now, not just silent faces. Good. That's nice. It feels more like Buddhafield. Okay, great. I'm unmuted again. Thank you to Buddhafield for inviting me to speak here. Thank you for your introduction, Katja. Thanks to you for all turning up this evening. I also want to thank my teacher, Dharma Vijay David Brazier, whose commentary on the 5 ranks I am relying on to a pretty large degree. Why did I want to talk about the 5 ranks this evening? I think it's because when I saw the theme for this year's Buddhafield, holding on to nothing, somehow I remembered this phrase, sitting with the ashes. that comes from this teaching. And sitting with the ashes, or sitting in the coals, as it's sometimes translated, it kind of made me think of the state of the world that we're in. I guess I was thinking of the wildfires in Australia and California last year, the record temperatures in the Arctic Circle. Excuse me. The record temperatures in the Arctic Circle over the last few weeks. And keeping that question in mind, in a world like this, what is there to hold on to? And so here's a teaching that describes a route to sitting in the ashes. There just seems something very appropriate about that. So this teaching comes from, excuse my Chinese pronunciation, comes from Dongshan Liangj, a Chinese monk from the 9th century. And it was partly in response to earlier teachings that described 3 stages of practice in the Huayan school. And I guess partly just based on his own spiritual experience. And I first heard about this a couple of years ago, and my teacher gave a talk. And I remember him saying it was quite controversial at the time. So that piqued my interest straight away. The 5 stages are illustrated by 5 circles. This is the first one. I made these props especially for this talk. I had to put arrows on the back, so I made sure I was holding them the right way up. They have echoes of the Tai Chi, the yin-yang symbol, which is kind of just to root it in that sense of Chinese philosophy, to root it in the culture of the I Ching, although there's no explicit link, it draws on those roots. And the final circle is completely black. And this is the thing that was controversial, because previously the idea of these stages is that there's less and less dark and more light, more illumination, more enlightenment, more emptiness. And yet here is a teaching that describes the final point of practice, the pinnacle of Buddhist practice, as being this dark black circle, sitting with the ashes, sitting in the coals. And that really intrigued me. Maybe I'll show them all to you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you've got a sense of the progression, and then I'll go through them one by one and describe them in a bit more detail. So this is the first one. The dark is, I pause then because it's a Chinese word that I want to say, but it's Shi. S-H-I-H is the transliteration, and it represents the mundane world, the world of conceit, samsara, our ordinary foolish minds, I suppose. And the white space is Li, the sacred, the emptiness. Heavenly is sometimes used, or the power of heaven in the Chinese descriptions. And this is the first symbol. I'll say more about that in a moment. The second one reverses the balance of those 2 elements. This is what I could do with an assistant. The third one is this, just a small dark circle in the middle. The fourth one is the position of complete emptiness, complete awe, if you like, standing in the light. And then the fifth one is that dark circle that we saw before, sitting with the ashes. So in number one, the mundane dominates. This is a kind of ordinary, worldly state of mind where we are just going about our daily business, really. We may have some sense of the spiritual life. We may be agitated by ideas that there is something more. Occasionally, we may catch glimpses of something beyond the ego going around in circles, but mostly we're trying to get by solving problems using the egoic mind. For myself, I think of my early life, the first couple of jobs that I had, all of my troubles were blamed on somebody else. When I was unhappy, it was the job that was at fault. So the answer was to look for a new job. Not owning or being interested in anything to do with my own state of mind, just looking to solve problems in a worldly way. And trying to solve problems in a worldly way only leads to worldly results. It may lead to some temporary happiness, but that's always going to be impermanent. So there's some dissatisfaction here, but also a sense of mostly not paying attention to spiritual practice. I guess all of these wheels, circles, we can think of in the exterior world. So this is like mostly inhabiting samsara, getting on with work, with family life, getting by on a day-to-day basis. But we can also think in terms of our state of mind. So here, the ego is sitting on top of any spiritual capacity. It's darkening it. Maybe just take a moment, I'll just hold this image up. Maybe just take a moment to notice how that resonates for you, if there's times in your own life that it speaks to. So that's the first one. The second circle, the light and dark, is reversed. And Liangj wrote about this one in one of his commentaries on the teachings. The phrase he used was, an old woman catching sight of her wrinkles in the mirror for the first time. I had this idea that I might get you all to look at your face on the Zoom screen at this moment. Mine's pretty, I don't know, I clicked on high definition, so I might be able to see a few wrinkles. Usually it's pretty good at smoothing things out on Zoom. It's about the state of noticing, oh, maybe there is something about me. Maybe there is something I need to pay attention to here. Maybe there's a frailty. It's, seeing wrinkles in the mirror, that's got echoes of dukkha, hasn't it? Birth, sickness, old age, death, and so on. So it's about recognizing dukkha. And you can recognize dukkha because there is something illuminating it. There's some container. There's a spiritual practice. So from a worldly point of view, this is a time of life when we are engaging in meditation, in chanting, in rituals, when we are doing the right things, more or less. And it allows us to begin to notice how it is to be human. What is it really like to be me? And it takes a bit of courage or trust or faith to do that, because it can be frightening to notice ourselves. So the spiritual practice, the light, supports that process. And when I was reflecting on what this circle meant for me, I thought of my time in university. I had a couple of jobs after school before I went to university. And when I got there, as time unfolded, I discovered that it didn't solve all of my problems. I'd been working in this job that I mentioned before that I didn't really like, and I was convinced it was the job's fault. And there were good things about the job and there were bad things about the job. It was quite a dysfunctional place in some ways. But I had this idea that, if I go to uni, study drama, that was the thing that I really wanted to do, study drama. That would enliven me. It would sort everything out. I'd be able to make those social connections that I'd been missing. And it's also the time where I was getting more and more engaged in Buddhist practice. I was meditating regularly. I was reading sutras and commentaries sporadically. And occasionally I got a glimpse of something that wasn't my egoic mind, a sense of, there is something here I can rest in. There's some spaciousness that's available. And I suspect that the container of that practice allowed me to feel my own suffering more acutely, to the point where one day I was walking down the street in a kind of daze, and this painful emotion was just springing up that I couldn't really place. Didn't have any context for it or content. But something in me said, I need some help. And that was a new thought for me. Previously, everything that had been wrong with the world. And something about my relationship to practice enabled me to, I feel like Liangj was a bit down on wrinkled old women, really. It's not particularly an issue. But using that metaphor, my practice allowed me to look in the mirror and see my own wrinkles, see my own darkness, we could say. So from that place, I was able to start taking some steps. I was able to engage in practice more. I was able to resource myself and eventually to find the right kind of help. And that sounds like a fairly straightforward process, doesn't it? But reality is, for me anyway, I spent quite a lot of time moving between these two different circles. And even in my life now, I go back into both of these two circles, of course. That's how it is to be human. Sometimes I'm completely preoccupied with worldly things, and my egoic mind gets involved, thinking it can work things out and solve things. Sometimes I move into this state where the light illuminates my ego and I go, there I go again. I think that happens on a different level to the level it happened on 10 or 15 years ago. I hope so anyway. I've been doing this practice for a long time. But we spend time moving between these two circles, where the mundane dominates and the sacred dominates. And you might think of that rhythm in your own life, occasionally going on retreat, then coming back into the world of work or family life. There's a kind of rhythm between those two things. And what happens next? I think, number 3 obviously is the next one in sequence, 1, 2, 3. Sometimes we go into number 3. Sometimes we just go straight into number 4, the circle, without anything in. But we'll speak about number 3 next, because that's the next one in order. So here we have spiritual practice, or the sacred, awareness of the sacred, all the way around the edge. And here is the darkness in the middle, hidden away. I'm just checking what Liangj said about this. Something about cutting off your tongue. Oh, that's it, yeah. He talked about the road that's free from dust, about cutting off your tongue and avoiding what is taboo. So this is about restraint. It's about sila. It's about keeping the precepts. It's about really deeply engaging in spiritual practice and putting yourself into the position of somebody who keeps all the precepts, going through life in a way that is restrained, that avoids excess, that avoids what is taboo. And this can look really good from the outside. You can look like you're doing a really good job of spiritual practice. And it can feel pretty good as well. Look at me, I'm doing well, I haven't slipped up lately. I'm being really skillful. And yet, right here in the center, there is still this pool of darkness. It's completely encapsulated, so maybe we're not aware of it and you can't see it on the surface, but it is there, and that's dangerous, of course, because it can sneak out in all kinds of ways. I don't know if you've ever been in a community in the loosest possible sense of the word, where there's a sort of value of being nice or being good to everybody. And some communities do that really well, of course, but sometimes that becomes this veneer of niceness or goodness. So we all mechanically keep the precepts, but these little bits of greed, hate are sneaking out through the cracks. That's the danger with this one. I guess from a point of view of what this looks like in the world, it might be just, I'm just going to enter the monastery. And as I say that, of course, I realise that I did that. I've been through that stage myself. In 2006, I entered the Buddhist house in Narborough and ordained as a novice monk for a few years. And a great deal of that time, particularly in the early stages, I was in this circle, really doing all the right things, following the rules as much as I could do, but not tending to that place of suffering in my own heart and not wanting to examine where that suffering was manifesting in the community. Because if I noticed it, maybe it would all just go dark. That's the fear, isn't it? When we're in this position, that if we start to pay attention to the central circle, it will just take over. I guess you can do this pretty well, that central circle can be bigger and smaller. We can be more or less dysfunctional in this position. It's also the position of spiritual bypassing. And I wanted to kind of do a little sidebar about spiritual bypassing because understandably it gets a bit of a bad rep. So spiritual bypassing is this idea that we can use spiritual practice to hide from suffering and to not acknowledge our own pain or others' pain, kind of retreating into heaven and losing our sense of the ground completely. And that can be very difficult to be around if you're really suffering. To come into relationship with somebody who is on cloud 9 is actually very difficult. I remember meeting somebody who had just had this catchphrase of, impermanence, impermanence, anicca, anicca. And actually, when somebody was really in pain, they would roll out this mantra, and they were really just completely settled and equanimous as far as you could tell. They'd roll out this mantra, but it completely missed the person that was in front of them. It didn't attend to that suffering. So that's the danger of spiritual bypassing, that it doesn't actually meet what's in the world. And I guess mentioned this already, but we do that because we're scared that meeting the suffering will overwhelm us completely, that we won't have the capacity to contain it. When we're not aware of our own ability to rest in emptiness, or when parts of us aren't aware of that, of course, the amount of suffering in the world can feel overwhelming and scary. For me, as a Pure Land Buddhist, trusting that there is the presence of the Buddha, the light of the Buddha that exists in the universe, that loves and supports me just as I am, that begins to undermine that fear, and it allows me to come more into relationship with the darkness from a different place. And of course, that leads me naturally into speaking about the fourth and the fifth circles. I said that in a very dramatic way, didn't I? The fourth and the fifth circles. Well, here they are. This is number 4. Standing in awe. I guess you might think of Adhisthana, which is just down the road from me. That idea of receiving blessings. Standing in the grace of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, resting in emptiness. Whatever words you want to describe this experience. Being in a place of love and bliss and confidence. Steeped in the way of heaven is the phrase that Liangj used. No interpenetration of the sacred and the mundane. So here we're just existing in the sacred. That's a pretty special experience. There's no sense of the ego. In fact, the ego is completely dark. In my teacher's book, The Dark Side of the Mirror, which is a commentary on Dogen's Genjo Koan, he uses this image of a window. If it's nighttime and you're outside a house and the light is on inside the house and the curtains are open, you can see into the house. When the light goes out, the window becomes a mirror. You can see the moonlight reflected in it. So in this analogy, the light inside the house is the ego light, and the light of the moon is the Buddha's light. And when we turn the light off inside the house, the window darkens and becomes a mirror and reflects that outside light and that outside world perfectly. So here, the ego light is darkened and we're just reflecting the light of the Buddha. We're just in receipt of that light. There was a later commentary that Liangj wrote about the 5 ranks, and he talked about this, number 4, as being, he said something about a partridge in relation to this circle. I can't remember exactly what the phrase is, but the sense is that the partridge it's a bird that rests on the ground. It's not a bird that tries to go high and lofty into heaven. It knows its place. So this is us being the partridge on the ground, looking up. We're in the position of the disciple, receiving blessings from the teacher, receiving blessings from the Buddha. So this is your partridge nature, if you like. When I look down, by the way, I'm looking at my page of notes. That's what I'm doing, just to make sure I don't forget anything that I wanted to say. Yeah, so my teacher, Dhammavidya, talks about this as being the Shravaka position. This is the position of one who hears the Dharma. And I guess now as I sit, feeling my way into my own experience of this circle, I'm remembering just before my ordination, I did a 5-day Nembutsu chanting retreat. Nembutsu is the practice of saying the name of Amida Buddha. So I was doing that, reciting the name of the Buddha from when I woke up in the morning to when I went to sleep in the evening. I did about 120,000 recitations over the 5 days. And throughout those 5 days, I guess I moved through all of these different circles, but towards the end, I had such a strong, deep sense of being in receipt of the Buddha's blessings. I went into that retreat being quite secular and skeptical, despite being about to ordain in a very devotional tradition. I guess different parts of me felt differently about that. And through the process of that 5 days, I felt like there was some kind of crack in the hard shell of my exterior that allowed in some of this light. And as time went on, I felt more and more in receipt of that light, and a real strong embodied sense that it wasn't anything I was generating myself. It was something that really was coming from all around me and outside of me. And stepping back into the world, we use that phrase, don't we? Everything was glowing. And it really felt like everything was glowing. So this is this circle, this pretty special circle. And it didn't feel like an ungrounded state, but it was a very nice state. Anyway, often that is the place where those teachings ended, the YN teachings, and the idea of those 3 or 4 stages sometimes they had in previous models. They'd end in the light, but this one goes on to sitting in the coals or sitting in the ashes. Coming back into the world reminds me of the ox herding pictures when he comes back into the marketplace. So this is coming back into samsara with the capacity to really sit with the suffering of the world, to deeply empathize with the plight of suffering living beings. Not just to look down at them from this place of bliss, but to be right next to them, knowing, oh, this is how it is to be a living being in samsara. This is how it is to suffer. This is what grief feels like. This is what pain feels like. And knowing that from a place of love. And that's the difference in quality. I like the way I sit with my psychotherapy clients, I suppose, being next to them in their suffering, but knowing that we can both still be loved in that moment, that even in this place where the world is ashes, love can still be present. Liangj said, not foolishly trying to be a Buddha. That was one of the qualities that he thought this circle had. So even being that partridge in receipt of awe, he kind of looked slightly askance at that. It's like, what are you trying to do? Who do you think you are? In the dining room upstairs, we've got 3 paintings of the Buddha and his disciples, and one of them, there are 2 monks flying in the corner, and nobody knows what this painting is about. And one of the other monks who's sitting on the ground by the Buddha is pointing up at these 2 flying monks in the sky. And my sense is that it's got a bit of that quality to it, like, what do you think you're doing up there? The place to be is down here with living beings who are suffering. This is the point of practice, to come into loving relationship with the world. And I guess in some ways there is a progression through these circles from 1 to 5, but it also describes just different states, different places that we find ourselves in the spiritual path. You know, sometimes I can feel really resourced to do this, to sit in the ashes. I guess I'm also thinking of doing sitting meditation in the centre of towns when I'm protesting or demonstrating. And sometimes I don't feel resourced to do that at all. I find myself back in one of the early circles. And then I engage with some practice and something happens and I find myself, oh yeah, of course, these blessings are available. And that gives me the strength to go back and sit with the ashes. Sometimes really having an embodied sense of receiving blessings, and sometimes just trusting that those blessings are there, that emptiness is available, whether I am really conscious of it or not. Emptiness, nirvana, the Pure Land, is always available. Now, I just want to briefly think about how we get into that fourth circle, because it kind of can't be manufactured in some ways. It's a spontaneous gift. It arises spontaneously in our practice. And as I was thinking about things arising spontaneously in practice, I remembered the story of Queen Vaidehi having her vision of the Pure Land, which is in the Contemplation Sutra. So she's locked away. There's a whole epic story around this, but her son has locked her away because, well, it doesn't matter why. I haven't got time to go into the details, but she's a queen. She's been locked away, and the Buddha goes to visit her. And while she's meeting with the Buddha, receiving this blessing, she has a spontaneous vision of, in the sutra it says, of all the Pure Lands of all the Buddhas. And she decides that she wants to be reborn in Amida's Pure Land because there's no hell realms there. So this real, and she feels, afterwards, she feels completely different. That was her experience. Oh, I've lost the card. Here it is. That was her experience of being in this circle. And then I think it's Ananda who's with the Buddha at the time. He says, oh, wow, what happened there? Can you tell me how to do that? And the Buddha gives him a visualization practice to do. It's a kind of painting by numbers meditation on the Pure Land. He says, imagine a ground of lapis lazuli, imagine the setting sun like a drum with a tight skin in the sky and these jeweled trees. He describes all the details. And that doesn't give Ananda, I think it's Ananda, I didn't check before coming to do the talk, but it doesn't give Ananda that spontaneous vision of the Pure Land, but it gives him some sense of that. So I would say faith, trust, confidence that that white circle exists, that there is emptiness, that there is the Pure Land. These things speak to us in different ways. It's something that's caught as much as anything else. You catch it from teachers, from other people who've had those experiences, from just trusting that it's possible. Actually, that act of experimenting, what Ananda was doing was experimenting with the idea that it could be possible. And eventually that experimentation will shift into something spontaneous arriving in his practice. This is why we talk about faith in the practice, because we're not always having an embodied experience of being in the white circle, but we trust that it's possible. We trust that the white circle exists because we've been told about it or we've had a taste of it. Sometimes that's enough. And even that trust in that can be enough to support us to move into the final circle and to be alongside the suffering of ourselves and the suffering of others with love. All right, thanks everybody. I think that's mostly everything that I wanted to say. So there's some time for questions. I can see some hands going up. If you don't know how Some of you who've been to talks before will know how to do this. If you don't, you can put your hand up. If you click on